Thank you very much for introducing me and also giving me the possibility to tell you something about the situation in the Netherlands, how in the Netherlands our government is making new legislation that is very, very hard for the farmers. Actually, we have a government that is unreliable, and I think that's for farmers the least you can have in a country. We have a nitrogen crisis, our government says, but it doesn't have to do so much with nitrogen, but it has a lot to do with policy making, and especially policy making that is not fair to the farmers. Actually, our government is trying to steal our land away, and I will show you in some examples. In the Netherlands, we have 162 Nature 2000 areas, but I should tell you that we do not have nature like you have it in the Czech Republic. We have all cultured land, and some areas are planted as nature. 118 of them have ecosystems that are nitrogen sensitive. And to protect that flora, they developed the critical deposition value. We call it in the Netherlands the kritische depositiewaarde. It is set by a scientist in the past, not through measurements, but through a model, through calculations. The critical deposition value, KDY, derives from these estimates are, however, so low that it is unfeasible to meet these KDWs, as we call them. And even, you can see here on the left side, the situation in the Netherlands, that only 12% of our critical deposition values are not exceeded. So 88% of all our critical deposition values are exceeded. If you take away half of the agricultural production, so the farmers, half of the farmers, you only reduce with 9%. If you, however, reduce to all agriculture and also all economical things that are done in the Netherlands, we still have 71% of the critical deposition values that are actually not in line with how our policymakers want it to be. So what you actually see here is that we have a government who has set unachievable goals. Then after a while, they have made it binding in our Nitrogen Act as a target. So no longer as an indicator, as it was really meant to be, but as a target. And there we get a very difficult situation, because then organizations, environmental organizations, can go to the judge, to the law, and say, you have to forbid these farmers from producing because they don't set their target. So we are now in a position, we are now in a situation in the Netherlands that we cannot have any economical activities anymore because of this very hard standards that are unrealistic. And this is how an unreliable government causes a crisis. We don't only have these critical deposition values that are difficult, but also different from other countries in Europe. And I do have a good example for that, because we have a neighbor, and that is one of the states of Germany, that is North Rhine-Westphalia, that is very similar. The area in square kilometers is similar, the population is similar. They do have a little bit more Nature 2000 areas, but we have more agriculture. But in Germany, they don't have a problem with nitrogen. They do not have a nitrogen crisis at all. So there you can see how much it has to do with our critical deposition values. So then we have areas. Areas is also a model. it is a model that our government has developed or had developed to estimate nitrogen emissions and the deposition of those emissions. ARIES doesn't measure, but ARIES calculates, estimates. And for years, the state organization who works with ARIES and who is the creator of this model, RIVM, refused to allow access to other scientists who wanted to access the model for its scientific value. They have done nothing for years to make clear to other scientists how this model was working. Then Farmers Defence Force had a big demonstration, and then they agreed to allow other scientists and the public to look at this system. Meanwhile, as we speak today, several commissions and research institutes have examined ARIES and all concluded that ARIES is not suitable for nitrogen policy. ARIES gives uncertainties that are so large, more than 100%, that the results are unreliable by definition. So both ARIES and the critical deposition value have been giving problems for years for agriculture, for farmers. Well, then you will think that maybe policymakers would make things better. Well, they haven't. They have made a new program approach to nitrogen. That was already done in 2015, and we call it the PAS, Program Approach to Nitrogen. And nitrogen is stikstof in the Netherlands. There was an environmental organization, MOB, Mobilization for the Environment, who then went to court because the PAS works like this. If you want to do an adjustment on your farm, you could first exceed the nitrogen emission and afterwards, with this innovation, reduce the emissions. And that is the PAS rulings of the 29th of May 2019 say is not how the birds and habitat guideline has to work. So on the 29th of May, a lot of farmers have become illegal. The PAS fell in a lawsuit, and all the farmers who had a PAS notification via the prevailing law were suddenly illegal. More than 3,400 farms have been in limbo ever since. And although the court has ordered the government to legalize these farms in the shortest possible time because they didn't do anything wrong, after 3.5 years, there is still nothing happening for those farmers. They are still illegal. The companies in question face further proceedings by Mobilization for the Environment, which demands that these farms are closed down. They face bank withdrawals and a government that is unreliable. Because today, as we speak, there is a demonstration in one of our provinces who say to farmers, okay, we know that you're not fault of having not a good permit anymore, but you will be fined. And there's one farmer who now has to pay for every quarter of the year 118,000 euros because of faults of our government, of our unreliable government. Still, there has come more things that are not okay. We have now a Nitrogen Reduction and Nature Improvement Act, WSN in Dutch, and that was introduced on the 24th of March 2021. And again, we have unachievable reduction rates in this because they still are using the critical deposition values that you can never meet, and they are still using areas to calculate your emissions and your deposition. What we see in the Habitats Directive is the obligation to achieve results, but it are the member states who determine how and at what pace it is implemented. Because we now have an act, and in this act is really a target that is really much too high to get, because we have unreliable measurements like areas and the critical deposition value. You see that the problems have even gone worse. So although Europe, Brussels, doesn't ask from us to reduce a certain percentage before a certain date, our government has set these goals. So they have made the situation for everybody who is doing something economical in the Netherlands worse. After the introduction of the Nitrogen and Nature Act, the Minister of Nitrogen and Nature, we now have a Minister of Nitrogen and Nature, introduced the National Rural Area Program, which is even tougher with reduction targets. They speed up the target, and also this system, this program, is not legal, because the parliament hasn't even been able to vote on it. So now farmers are pushed to reduce emissions that you cannot measure, because we don't have the system to measure it in the right way to really calculate a reduction target that we can never achieve. So situations are getting worse and worse. And you would say that, well, of course, farmers have emissions through the cattle, but you also have a lot of nitrogen emissions from factories, from planes, from cars, from transport, from people, consumption patterns, etc. Only the farmers have to leave. Only the farmers have to reduce. Only the farmers get acts. But a communication from the European Commission on the 12th of October 2021 says there should not be selective application. Our government makes this selective application because no other firm is really so much threatened by the government as we are. Actually, they are not threatened at all. And we do have a lot of companies like Tata Steel, like Schiphol, like Rockwool, who don't even have the necessary permit for the activities that they have today. Although the farmers all had their permits via the route that our government said they should do. So we all have permits. And other companies don't have, but the other companies can continue their illegal situation, and the farmers have to leave. Since Friday, the 25th of November, so last Friday, also Black Friday for a lot of people, but it was really Black Friday for the farmers in the Netherlands, we got 4 letters from ministers. They have published all new requirements and conditions for farmers alone. As many as 3,000 farms will be designated as peak encroachers on Nature 2000 sites and must give way. Of course, they are given a year to agree on this and to get a farm somewhere else, because if they do not go voluntarily, like they call it, they will push. So they will take your permit away. They will make sure that the bank withdraws its money, etc., etc. So what we now really see is that the hunt for our land is really open since last Friday, because in this letter also says that they want the right to buy every hectare of land if I stop as a farmer. So it says that if I don't have the courage anymore to continue as a farmer in the Netherlands, I cannot sell my land to anyone else but the state. And of course, that is a very, very sad thing for our democracy. They don't bother anymore about property rights, and they don't bother anymore our government on democracy. Besides the threat of expropriation, the government is claiming the sole ownership of our agricultural land. We are required to also give away our nitrogen rights. They want to take away 40% of all the nitrogen rights. So then there is, of course, 40% less room for farmers to farm, to produce food. That's also something. In these 4 letters from our agricultural government, from our agricultural ministers, not once is the word food in these letters. Our agricultural ministers do not care about food production anymore. What we say is, why are only the farms the peak loaders? Why are the big emitters without the nature permits left alone? But also, why is the European Commission looking away? Because we have tried to get help as farmers, because what is happening here has nothing to do with democracy anymore. Also, what we see and what is forbidden from European legislation is that they want to swap NH3, so the ammonia, with NOx. So everything, the nitrogen oxides that are getting out of cars and planes, etc. They want to swap it, and pollution swapping in Europe is forbidden. Also, it is forbidden in the NEC directive, so the National Emission Ceilings Directive. So how can we get out of this mess? Because we as farmers are, of course, giving a lot of programs to our government to get out of this mess in a very decent way, so that we all can continue with our farms, but also that economically we can do a lot. Farmers Defence Force has developed a program, and it's called the stikstofdepositiewaarde, and in translation it is the nitrogen deposition value. All activities reported as on the 1st of July 2015 and thus included in the SDY, so the nitrogen deposition value, will be legalized. Because we see that before the PAS, so the program that a lot of farmers got illegal about, the situation before that, everybody was legal and is still legal. So we say we have to look at all activities, not only the agricultural activities, but everything. So what did transport do? What did building houses do, etc., etc., transport. Then we look at how much nitrogen did everybody emit, and then legalize all these firms, all this emission. The nitrogen deposition of a given company as of the 1st of July 2015 allocated to that company will be its nitrogen space as a sector, but also as a region. Then we say no external netting, so no pollution swapping between the different economic sectors. So every sector has to reduce the same percentage to get nature better, to reduce nitrogen deposition on Nature 2000 areas and the ecosystems. As a result, no large-scale exchange, we say, of NH3 and NOx is permitted anymore. This program will contribute to preventing deterioration of the natural characteristics of the Nature 2000 sites concerned, because that was one of the goals our government says. The program will include a guarantee that there is no reasonable doubt that new activities will not damage the natural characteristics of the Nature 2000 sites concerns. So we really have to prove that we are reducing nitrogen. Only new activities through internal and external netting. Internal netting is that with an innovation, you, in your permit, in your farm, reduce nitrogen. External netting is that if a farmer wants to quit, he has a permit, and then he can sell his permit and his nitrogen rights to another farmer who lives nearby, who is also in this same area. And then our government will get a percentage to reduce the emissions, and the rest is used for the farmer to set up a new barn or whatever he wants to do. State skimming of nitrogen space to be transferred. So maximum 30%, we say, of external netting. So 70% goes to the farmer and 30% goes to nature. The PAS notifiers, so all the people who now are without a permit that are not fault, are also on our minds, and something has to happen for these people. They have to be legalized. So the program, as we have shown you, creates nitrogen space for nature through skimming in external netting. But a good voluntary, and voluntary really as it is meant as voluntary, national buyout scheme creates nitrogen space to legalize those PAS notifiers and the bottleneck cases, because we also have bottleneck cases. That is, we have a lot of farmers who do not have somebody to take over the farm. There are not a lot of young guys coming in and young girls coming in. All these farms would like to stop if there was a good buyout scheme, and that they are really given the opportunity to live a normal life when they are having this buyout. And then other farmers can take over their space. Irrevocable permits and property rights will be respected. That's one of our demands, because there are a lot of permits that you cannot take away, and our government is threatening to do so. But it is your right, and it should be respected in this way. If we do this program, we as farmers do give a lot to our government to solve the problems that they have created on their own. So we need some guarantees. Modification of the Nitrogen Reduction and Nature Improvement Act. Reduction targets out of the law. Brussels doesn't demand it, so our own government shouldn't also. This reduction target is not in line with the Birds and Habitat Directive and should not be from the Council of State either. Legislation in line with the Council of State's ruling. Targets removed from the SNN Act and permit granting based on netting. What does agriculture back to the 1st of July 2015? Extensification through less livestock through buyback. Legislation including PAS notifiers through buyback scheme. Emission reduction through external netting, and emission reduction by internal netting. So as a result, what will the government gain in return? Stable policy well beyond 2030, nitrogen reduction for years to come, Netherlands out of the lockstep, and that is for all economical sectors, so not only agriculture, but every sector can continue. Accelerated nitrogen reduction with every development. So everything we do will give nature 30%. No panic policy, what we are facing today. Legally 100% sustainable policy, and restoring trust in the government. Because the trust in the government, because of this whole situation, has gone back to 10%. Only 10% of the Dutch people still believe in this government. And that is, of course, a very sad thing to say. Farmers do not trust their policymakers at all anymore. And that is a situation you should solve as a government. This is how we go on our way to a natural reduction of the nitrogen deposition. Because of our program and our reduction with a 30% of every netting, internal or external, that we do, you have to guarantee that we reduce nitrogen. Well, our government looked at all this and got back to us last week, only a day before they came with their 4 letters. And what we see today is that after 3.5 years of talking about how to make the legislation better, to make sure that our past notifiers are legalized, as the judge, as the court said they should be. After giving a lot of facts, scientific facts from scientists that say areas is not suitable, you should change that. The critical deposition values that you have are not even in practice to do for no one. Our government just continues on their own road. We now see that they want the land, they want the farmers to get away. They do not care about food security, and they do not care about food safety, because Dutch producers produce in a very safe and high quality way. What we see on our farms, but also in the villages, who of course are very bound to our agriculture, is a lot of sadness, a lot of suicides, a lot of people losing every hope for the future. And that is actually what our unreliable government has done in these last years. They have really done the worst that we have ever seen in decades. So we don't trust our government anymore. I hope that you in the Czech Republic will never do to your farmers what our government has done to us. We are still fighting. We are still fighting for our rights, and situation has to improve. So we also want to go to court, and we will go to court with the people who are now illegal because of our unreliable government. And I thank you very much for taking the time to hear us, and maybe we can in future help each other. And thank you very much.